This video, we're going to talk about the 5th Targaryen King of Westeros, Viserys I. He followed Jaehaerys I and was actually voted on to be the next king because there was a whole thing about who should inherit with Jaehaerys. And so they decided on Viserys because he was in his 20s and a dragon rider and seemed like the best candidate. And he ended up taking the throne after Jaehaerys I's grandfather when the realm was at its most prosperous. The Targaryens were at its strongest. There was the most princesses and princes and dragons everywhere. He had a full treasury. There was goodwill all around from his grandfather Jaehaerys' rule. So it was a great time to rule. And he did end up ruling the kingdom from 103 AC to 129 AC. Unfortunately, his rule would bring about the Dance of the Dragons, which was a terrible civil war between Targaryens and caused a lot of conflict in the realms. And while we're going to talk about the Dance of Dragons and what exactly the incidences that kind of sparked it off, I will say that Viserys' love of his only daughter from his first wife, Queen Aemma, was Rhaenyra, and he loved her so much, and he groomed her, and he brought her into council meetings and wanted her to learn, and he loved her so much, and he decided that she was going to be his heir. And if you watched my previous video, you know that the Great Council ruled that males will always succeed. Females are not counted in succession. It's all about keeping the male bloodline. And so when Viserys basically was like, no, I love Rhaenyra, she's my daughter, and she is going to be the Princess of Dragonstone and then become the Queen of Westeros, there was a little bit of tension, and this would come out to play later. So let's first talk about Viserys I's brother, Prince Daemon. Daemon was Viserys' biggest supporter. He was his brother, he loved him, he fought for him. When they were trying to decide who was going to rule after Jaehaerys I and they had decided on Viserys, some people were a little upset, and Daemon was ready to get a fleet of people. He had rounded people up, and he was ready to secure his brother's throne. He had always supported him. He ended up first serving as the Master of Coins, then the Master of Law, and there were some issues because he was very quick-tempered, he was hot-headed, he was quick to the sword, and he had a rival in Sir Otto Hightower, who was the Hand of the King, and there was some jealousy issues between that, and eventually Sir Otto ended up being able to say, hey, we need to get rid of Daemon, he's hot-tempered, he's bad for ruling, he's just not the type of person you should have. And so they ended up, Viserys made him commander of the City Watch, and he actually thrived there. I mean, some say it's because he really liked torturing people, but he became known as the Lord Fleabottom, and crime dramatically fell when he was, on the watch. He was doing a really great job. So in general, it actually was more of a position suited for him. Unfortunately, in how well Daemon ended up supporting his brother, he had always been in hopes that he himself would become Prince of Dragonstone and then inherit the throne after his brother. And some people kind of think that's why he supported him so much and always had his back, because he always had that hope. And this creates further problems when Viserys really, just loved his daughter Rhaenyra and wanted her to be Queen of Westeros and made her the Princess of Dragonstone. That kind of drove a wedge in between them. And not only that, but Daemon was married to the Lady of Ruinstone, who was, inheriting the Vale, and he hated her. He said to say that, the men there fuck sheep because the sheep are more beautiful than the women, and he called her his brawn bitch, and there was not love between them, and it caused more animosity when his brother's like, nope, you're gonna stay with her, you're not remarrying. That's the end of this. And in fact, the bitterness grew so much that when his daughter Rhaenyra was put as the Princess of Dragonstone, Daemon, her uncle, didn't even show up. He was just so PO'd about the whole thing, he wasn't there. So eventually, Viserys' wife, Queen Aemma, ends up dying in childbirth, and she gave him a boy, and unfortunately the boy, Balon, ended up dying shortly after the queen, and eventually he remarried, and he remarried his hand, Sir Otto's daughter, Queen Alicent, who was also the old king's former nursemaid, So Jaehaerys' old nursemaid, which there were some rumors that maybe she was more, but most likely just, people that were jelly. And even though most of the realm was happy about it, it's said that Daemon ended up whipping the person that gave him the news about his brother marrying someone. Because now there's going to be more competition if, he ends up having a boy, and we know about the succession rules. And in fact, Daemon was getting so PO'd and just, he was waiting for the crown, and he was beginning to realize that he probably was never going to have it, so he ended up making an alliance with the Sea Snake in an attempt to carve out his own kingdom. Eventually, through a bunch of battles, he ended up killing the Myrish prince. He declared himself the king of the Narrow Sea, and Viserys was like, you want to know what? Whatever, as long as it keeps you out of trouble, you can be the king of anything you want over there. And Viserys actually gave him money to help in his conquest and battles to carve out his own little tiny kingdom away from Westeros. So while Daemon is busy over there fighting his fights, trying to get his little kingdom so that he can do his own thing, Viserys' wife Alicent ended up having a boy named Aegon in 107 AC, and then it was followed by his sister Helena, which would actually be the boy Aegon's future bride, and then another son named Aemon. And this actually made people think, okay, so with this new queen that now Viserys has, they finally had a boy, this is going to be the person that inherits. And Viserys was like, nope, I said Rhaenyra was going to be the Queen of Westeros. I'm sticking by that. And this made Sir Otto Hightower, his hand, not happy, which eventually his little scheming would get him dismissed. But he would come back again as the hand later. And also made the Queen Alicent a little unhappy because she's like, you have your heirs, you have your boys. Of course she wants to see her children succeed and become better and, rule Westeros. But Viserys was having none of that. He had already decided what his heir was, and he did not care what the Great Council had to say about rules of inheritance. So now, in 109 AC, Lord Strong, who was the Master of Laws, is now the new hand because Viserys was getting sick of Otto Hightower's kind of, nudging and trying to get his daughter's children to be on the throne. And 111 AC, things started to break down a little bit. There was a big tournament, and Queen Alicent was wearing a beautiful green gown, and Rhaenyra was wearing red and black, clearly showing, hey, I am the heir to Westeros, I'm the one doing it. She wanted everyone to know, I'm a Targaryen, this throne is mine. And this is what started the war, and they were called the Greens and the Blacks. This tournament, we also saw Daemon coming back. He had his crown on because, he was now the king of the Narrow Sea, and he ended up taking off his crown, kneeling in front of his brother, and offering it to his brother, and, basically saying, I'm yours, I'm here to serve you. He was doing it as a sign of peace, and his brother ended up putting the crown back on his head, kissing both cheeks, and making peace, because of all else, Viserys really loved his brother and really wanted to have peace with him. Unfortunately, that peace would not last, and a few moons later, Daemon ends up getting exiled by his brother, and nobody's really sure what was the twisting knife. Some say that they quarreled, and it just got too heated. Some say that, Queen Alicent was like, he needs to go, he's trouble everywhere he goes, and, possibly Sir Otto Hightower also, poking the bear, because that's what that guy does, he gets his nose in everything. And then other people kind of have a less savory tale that Rhaenyra wanted one of the night guards, she had a thing for him, and that her uncle, Daemon, was like, I can teach you how to seduce this guy, and some say that maybe they were doing stuff together, and that instead of Daemon teaching her how to seduce the Night's Guard, that in fact he was seducing her because, hey, if he marries her, then he can actually be the king of Westeros. Regardless of what story is true, we do know that Daemon basically went to Viserys and said, hey, I want your daughter, my niece's hand in marriage. I don't want to be married to the Lady of Ruinstone anymore. I hate her. I don't want to be with her. let me marry your daughter, and Viserys was like, no, you're exiled, get out of here. And Daemon ends up leaving the Seven Kingdoms, and he goes back to the Stepstones to continue his war. So he's exiled, he's in the Stepstones. 113 comes, Rhaenyra is finally of age, and people are courting her like crazy. They're giving her gifts, they're doing duels in her honor, they're trying to show that they're the strongest. Everyone's basically just falling all over themselves because they want to be King of Westeros, and, you know, she is said to be a very beautiful, playful, smart woman, so, you know, there's more to it than just that. There's also talk about marrying her to her half-brother Aegon, who is of the new Queen Alicent and Viserys, but those two hated each other, and that hate is really going to come out next week's video when we talk about Dance of Dragons, so that marriage was not going to be a possibility. And, you know, they say that Viserys knew that his wife really was pushing the agenda with her kids, and that she was saying the marriage of Aegon to her more because of ambition for her child than for the love for Rhaenyra, and that kind of upset him too. Eventually it was decided that Prince Lenore would end up marrying her, and he actually was in contention with Viserys before, when the council was trying to figure out after Jaehaerys I who would rule. It was between Viserys and him, and he ended up getting overlooked. But now he was 19, and he thought, okay, well, you have the blood of the dragon on both sides, you're an accomplished dragon rider, you have your own dragon, you're going to be a perfect match for my daughter, you're now 19. Unfortunately, he liked squires more than he did women, and this would kind of be his downfall. And Rhaenyra wasn't really happy about this. She didn't want to be with them. There were some rumors that, you know, she just still had it for her uncle Daemon. And maybe in a little bit of rebelliousness, she ended up giving away her virginity to Sir Harwin Strong, who wasn't, you know, one of the best knights, kind of a dog. But that didn't matter. Her protest didn't matter. Viserys is like, if you protest me on this and you don't marry Lenore, then you are not going to inherit Westeros. It's going to be taken from you. So in 114 AC, she ended up marrying him. He was newly knighted. There was a tourney and celebration for it. In the tourney, Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, who was said to be the lover of Lenore, ended up getting killed, and he went into a bit of a rage over that, and Lenore ended up going back. And some say they didn't even consummate the marriage, and they spent most of their time apart. This was not a happy, we love each other marriage. You know, this was arranged marriage, and Lenore went for the same team and just really didn't have a lot of interest in Rhaenyra. And she mostly stayed on Dragonstone, and to be honest, I think they both preferred to be apart from each other. Some problems arose on 114 AC when Rhaenyra ended up delivering a boy called Jaehaerys, and he did not have silver white hair, did not have purple eyes, did not have the same nose. Instead, he had brown hair and eyes and a pug nose and looked a lot like Sir Harwin Strong, which is the man she ended up giving her virginity to. And then she had two more sons, Viserys and Joffrey. And once again, they did not look like Rhaenyra or Lenore. They looked a lot like Sir Harwin Strong, and tongues started wagging, and it got to the point where Viserys is like, you know, if anyone questions my grandkids, who they come from, I will cut out your tongue. And Viserys even went so far as put a dragon egg in each of the cradles, and when the dragons were born from it, that basically was enough proof for him. So now we're going to talk about kind of the foundation of the Dance of Dragons, so the 4 tragedies that happened in 120 AC, and it basically became remembered as the Year of the Red Spring. The first tragedy was the death of Laenor's sister, Laena, and she was once going to be a bride for Viserys, but she had wed Prince Daemon instead in 115 AC after his wife, Lady of the Runestone, ended up dying while hunting in the Vale, which, you know, in itself is a little suspicious, but I'll let that go. Daemon, during that time, had actually grown tired of the Stepstones and given up his crown, and 5 other people would, you know, fight for it, and then eventually the kingdom would be gone and over with. Laena had ended up giving Daemon 2 twin daughters, Baela and Rhaena, and even though King Viserys was PO'd about the marriage, that, you know, it had happened without his permission, he allowed Daemon to present his daughters at court in 117 AC. Which, of course, the council was all about, and so probably was Sir Otto Hightower, because everyone's like, oh, Daemon's just trouble, blah, blah, blah. But, like I said before, Viserys really did love his brother. Laena ended up getting pregnant again in 120 AC, and she ended up delivering a son that Daemon, you know, he really wanted. But she ended up having a twisted, deformed child, and it died shortly after birth, and so did she. This death, unfortunately, of his sister would follow by his own, so Prince Lenore was at Spicetown, and his companion, his friend, his lover, as people said, Sir Carl Corey, became in a quarrel with him, and some say it was because he was going to replace him aside with a new favorite, and they ended up drawing their blades, and Lenore he was killed. And Sir Carl he fled the scene. And while they think this is a whole lover's quarrel thing, you know, jealousy replaced, something, Daemon ended up doing it because he wanted Rhaenyra free for himself, which, you know, isn't too far-fetched to think of. The third problem, or tragedy, happened when the sons of Alicent and the sons of Rhaenyra ended up getting into a fight. Dragonless Aemon Targaryen wanted to claim the late Laena's dragon, Vhagar, for himself. A fight ended up ensuing, fists, you know, came out. Aemon ended up mocking Rhaenyra's boys, calling them Strongs instead of Targaryens, and the prince ended up taking a knife and plunging it into Aemon's eye. Afterwards, Aemon was called Aemon One Eye, even though he actually did end up winning the dragon. And this is, again, where Viserys was like, yeah, if anyone talks about them being Strongs, not Targaryens, anyone questions their lineage or their blood, you know, your tongues will be cut out. He was very clear that, you know, this is going to happen. And it did happen a couple times. And for Viserys, he said, you know, his wife and his kids, they need to stay, through her, need to stay at King's Landing, and Rhaenyra and her kids need to stay at Dragonstone, and he ended up replacing Sir Harwin Strong and making him go back to Harrenhal and giving a new sworn shield to Rhaenyra. The fourth tragedy that ended up happening is the Hand of the King and his son ended up dying in a tragedy. There was a terrible fire in Harrenhal, and if you know the history of Harrenhal, man, that place seems cursed. If you are, like, from there or in that building, I would just stay away from that building. But whether it was a conspiracy or whether it just happened on accident, Sir Otto Hightower ended up becoming the Hand of the King again. Finally, Rhaenyra ended up wedding her uncle, Prince Daemon, and then in 120 AC, she ended up delivering him his first son and named him Aegon. So if you remember, Viserys and Alicent already named their firstborn child, boy child, Aegon, and now Rhaenyra ended up naming her firstborn son Aegon, and that PO'd the queen even more, and the two Aegons became known as Aegon the Elder and Aegon the Younger. In 122 AC, Rhaenyra ended up delivering a second son, Viserys, and he was a little unhealthy. They ended up putting a dragon egg in his cradle, and it didn't hatch, so some people were a little weary about that. And then finally, in 129 AC, Viserys I ended up dying. His son, Aegon the Elder, had ended up wedding his sister, Helaena, and Helaena had born Aegon the twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera. Viserys died by he ended up injuring himself on the Iron Throne in 128 AC after rendering a judgment. The wound became super infected. A maester ended up cutting off 2 fingers, and it just wasn't enough. As 128 ended and 129 began, Viserys grew increasingly ill, and while he was entertaining his grandchildren from his bed, he ended up saying he was tired, he dismissed the grandchildren, and he fell asleep and never woke up again. He ended up ruling for 26 years. He had a most prosperous time. The kingdom would never see such strong Targaryens, as many dragons, but unfortunately his rule also seeded the Dance of the Dragons, which we will end up talking about next week. So make sure you come back, make sure you like, subscribe, and come back for more geeky videos every day. We also do a new Game of Thrones or a Song of Ice and Fire video every week.